The music stopped. That's what I remember most about this one. Not the screaming after, not the glass on the floor. The music stopped. And for about 3 seconds, the room just held its breath. Like everyone knew something terrible was about to happen, and nobody could figure out how to leave in time. My name is Marcus Cole. I spent 28 years working homicide for the NYPD and the Chicago Police Department. I have stood in more rooms where someone died than I can count. I have seen what a bullet does to a human body. I have seen what anger does to people who should have known better. And I have learned the hard way that some of the worst murders I ever worked started with a party, started with music, started with someone feeling betrayed in front of a room full of people who could do nothing to stop it. If you're new here, subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one is going to make you think about what you might do if you were in that room. This is case number 19-0847, Jefferson County, November of 2019. A woman's 30th birthday. 19 people in a rented hall. A long dining table still covered in half-eaten cake. And one of those people was about to lose their life over a text message. Let me tell you how we got there. The victim, and I use that word the way we use it in this work because it is a word that carries weight. The victim was a 28-year-old woman named Danielle Reese. She was the guest of honor's closest friend, had been since college. The kind of friendship where you show up to the hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning because her mother called and something went wrong. The kind of friendship where you stand next to her at the altar and you mean every word when you say you're not going anywhere. Danielle had been dating a man named Robert Aldridge for just under 2 years. They met at a work event. He was quiet. She was the one who talked enough for both of them. Friends said it worked. He grounded her. She made him laugh. They were not engaged yet, but everyone close to them assumed it was coming. She had already started dropping hints about venues. He smiled and changed the subject, which, in my experience, is how most men signal that they are not ready without actually saying it. On the night of the party, Danielle arrived at the hall around 7. Robert was already there, helping set up. The host, the birthday woman, her name was Michelle Vance. Michelle had gone all out. String lights, a DJ, an open bar for the first 2 hours, which, in a rented hall full of people who know each other, is usually enough to make sure the night ends in someone crying in the bathroom or kissing someone they shouldn't be kissing, sometimes both. Danielle wore a dark green dress. She looked good. Her friends told her so. She was glowing in a way that didn't look forced. She was happy. That's important to understand when you are trying to understand what happened next. Because what happened next didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come from a history of violence or a pattern of jealousy that people saw and ignored. Danielle Reese was not a woman who walked into that party expecting the worst night of her life. Robert was charming that night, affable, talking to people he didn't know well, which he rarely did. Around 8:30, a woman arrived late. Name was Carla Mercer. She was a co-worker of Robert's. Michelle had invited her because they were on the same department, and Michelle believed in mixing her social circles. Carla was attractive, sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who laughed loud enough to turn heads when she entered a room. I am going to be precise about this because precision is the only thing I have left to give these people, and it matters. Within 15 minutes of arriving, Carla was standing next to Robert at the bar. They were talking. That is not a crime. That is not even suspicious on its own. Co-workers talk at parties. It happens. But the text started at 8:47. We pulled the phone records. Robert Aldridge's phone, Carla's phone, Danielle's phone. I am going to tell you what we found because this is the part of the case that haunts me in ways I don't talk about on this podcast very often. And I need you to understand the timeline because the timeline is what turns a tragedy into something that could have been stopped. 8:47 p.m., Carla sends Robert a text. It says, "You clean up nice. Robert replies 30 seconds later, "You don't look so bad yourself." At this point, Danielle is across the room talking to Michelle. She has no reason to look at Robert's phone. She has no reason to suspect anything. They have been together 2 years and she trusted him. That trust is going to be part of the story, and I need you to hold on to it because we are going to come back to it. 9:04 p.m. Carla texts, "Can I ask you something?" Robert, "Go ahead." Carla, "Would you ever cross the line?" Robert, "What line?" Carla, "The one you're standing next to right now." 9:19 p.m. Danielle's phone buzzes. She pulls it out. It is a text from a number she does not recognize. "This is the part of the case I want you to sit with. Someone, we never identified who, sent Danielle Reese a screenshot. Just one screenshot. It was the text thread between Robert and Carla. Just the first few messages, not the later ones. Just enough to make her see something she was not supposed to see. At a party full of people, without any context, without any explanation, without anyone to ask except the person who was standing right there looking at her. She looked at the phone. Then she looked at Robert. Then she looked at Carla. And she walked across the room and she tapped Robert on the shoulder. And she said, and I have this from 2 witnesses who were close enough to hear it. She said, "Can I talk to you outside?" That is all she said. She did not scream. She did not throw a drink in his face. She did not make a scene. Danielle Reese, in the most controlled way possible, asked her boyfriend to step away from the woman he had been texting and talk about it like an adult, like someone who deserved an explanation. Robert looked at her for a second, and then he looked at Carla, and then he said, "There's nothing to talk about." Those 4 words, "There is nothing to talk about." I have heard those words in hundreds of statements. I have heard them from husbands, from wives, from mothers, from men who were standing in rooms with bodies and trying to figure out how to explain their way out of it. There is nothing to talk about, is what you say when you have decided that your version of the truth is the only version that matters. When you have already chosen your side and you do not care about the cost. Danielle did not escalate. I want to be clear about that because this case went a lot of directions in the media afterward, and some of them were not fair to her. She did not scream. She did not hit him. She looked at him and she said, "Really?" And he said, "Really?" And then he turned back to the bar and he kept talking to Carla. So Danielle went back to the party. She danced with her friends. She smiled in photographs. She laughed at something Michelle said near the DJ booth. On the inside, she was processing something that I have seen destroy people in ways that have nothing to do with physical violence. The specific, corrosive knowledge that the person you love has been lying to you in front of your face, and everyone around you can see it except you. She went to the bathroom around 9:45. She was in there for 11 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were red. Michelle went to her. Michelle asked if she was okay. Danielle said she was fine. She was not fine, but she was trying to be. That is the kind of person she was. At 10:14 p.m., Robert left the party with Carla. They did not say goodbye to Danielle. They did not say goodbye to anyone. They just walked out together. One witness, a man named Derek, who was standing near the door, told us he saw Robert put his hand on Carla's lower back as they walked to the parking lot. He said it looked natural, like he had done it before. Danielle found out they left at 10:17. Michelle told her. Michelle did not know what to say, so she just said, "They left." And Danielle stood there in the middle of the dance floor with the string lights glowing above her and the music playing, and she just nodded, like she expected it, like part of her had known it was coming and was somehow already ahead of the story instead of behind it. And then she left the party too, without saying goodbye to anyone, without telling Michelle where she was going. She just picked up her purse and she walked out into the parking lot. The next time anyone saw Danielle Reese alive, she was on the concrete outside her apartment building. She had been stabbed twice, once in the chest, once in the abdomen. The blade had gone through her dress and into the soft tissue beneath. It had missed her heart by about 3 centimeters. That is not the kind of detail I usually lead with, but I am leading with it here because that 3 centimeters is the difference between a survivable wound and what actually happened. She bled out on the concrete in front of her building before the paramedics arrived. The 911 call came in at 10:41 p.m. The caller was a neighbor who heard something that sounded like an argument and then a sound that was not an argument. When we arrived, she was still warm. The weapon was on the ground about 6 feet from her body, a kitchen knife, 8-inch blade, taken from her own apartment, which meant the person who used it had been inside her home or had access to it. We later determined that Robert Aldridge still had a key. He had never returned it. Danielle had asked him to, multiple times. He kept saying he would. He never did. The texts on Robert's phone from that night. We got them 2 days later with a warrant. Told a story that I have now read more times than I can count. The early messages were flirty. By 10:30, after they had left the party, they were explicit. And then at 10:38, 3 minutes before the 911 call, Robert texted Carla, "I have to go handle something." And Carla replied, "Did she find out? Did she find out? That is the question." And I want you to sit with the fact that Carla Mercer, the co-worker, the woman who had been texting another woman's boyfriend all night at that woman's birthday party, Carla Mercer sent a text at 10:38 p.m. that said, "Did she find out?" That is not a question you ask if you do not understand the consequences of what has been happening. That is not a question you ask if you think this is innocent. Carla Mercer knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew that Danielle was going to find out. The only question she had was whether Danielle had found out yet. We arrested Robert Aldridge the next morning. He was at Carla's apartment. When we knocked on the door, he answered in her clothes. I am not going to tell you what that did to Carla's statement to investigators, because she gave 3 different versions of what happened that night, and none of them made sense, and all of them tried to put distance between her and Robert in ways that the phone records did not support. Robert gave a statement. He said he had gone to Danielle's apartment to talk to her. He said she attacked him with a knife. He said he disarmed her and she fell and hit her head on the kitchen counter and that he panicked and left. He said he did not stab her. The medical examiner looked at the wound on Danielle's chest and looked at Robert's story and said, "That is not what happened here." The angle of the stab wound was consistent with someone who was standing over Danielle, not engaged in a mutual struggle. The wound in her abdomen was consistent with her being turned away from her attacker when the second blow landed. She was trying to get away. She was not attacking. Robert Aldridge went to trial in April of 2021. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found him guilty of first-degree murder. He is serving life without the possibility of parole. Carla Mercer was charged as an accessory and accepted a plea deal for 5 years. She served 3. I want to talk about the scene, because this is where my authority comes from, and it is the part of this case that I cannot shake. Danielle Reese was found on her back. Her green dress was mostly white by the time we got there. The blood had dried and changed color in the November air. One arm was bent under her body. The other was extended, fingers slightly curled, the way your hand looks when you are reaching for something and you never get there. Her eyes were open. I have been in this work for a long time, and I still cannot tell you what it means when a victim's eyes are open at a scene. I have seen it in cases where there was no struggle. I have seen it in cases where there was. I do not know if it means anything or if it is just the body doing what bodies do, but I remember it every time. There was a piece of cake on the kitchen counter inside her apartment, chocolate with white frosting. Someone, we think Michelle, who had dropped it off earlier, had written happy birthday on it in blue icing. 30 years old. She was 30 years old. She had a life that was not finished. She had friendships and a career and a mother who called her every Sunday and the father who was still grieving the loss of his own father 3 months earlier. She had a future that ended on concrete because a man she trusted decided that his Yuvon was more important than her life. The string lights from the party were still in the bag by her door. Michelle had given them to her, and she had forgotten to bring them inside. They were still in the bag. The party was still happening somewhere in her mind when she died. That is what I think about. Not the crime, not the trial. The bag of string lights by the door, and the piece of cake on the counter, and the way her hand looked reaching for something she never got to. Robert Aldrich never expressed remorse. Not at trial, not at his sentencing, not in the 3 interviews I have read from his appeals. He maintained that Danielle attacked him first. He maintained that he was the victim. He maintained that the text messages meant nothing, and that Carla was just a friend, and that the entire thing had been blown out of proportion by a jealous woman who could not handle the truth. I do not work appeals. I am not involved in his case anymore. But I have seen enough of these over the years to know that the men who never admit it are often the ones who never will. And I have learned, painfully, that there is nothing I can do with that knowledge except document it and keep telling the story correctly. Carla Mercer served her time and was released. I do not know where she is now. I do not look for that information because I do not think knowing will give me anything I need. But I think about the question she asked in that text at 10:38. Did she find out? And I think about the fact that she knew. She knew what she was doing. She knew the damage it would cause. And she stayed in that room at that party and she kept texting him while Danielle danced in a green dress and laughed at her best friend's birthday because she had no idea what was happening 6 feet away from her in the dark. Here is what I need you to take away from this case. Danielle Reese asked Robert Aldrich to step outside and talk. She did it quietly. She did it with control. She did not make a scene. She gave him a chance to explain. She gave him the one thing that most people in her situation would not have given, the benefit of the doubt, the chance to speak before she decided. And he told her there was nothing to talk about. And then he left the party with the other woman. And then he went to her apartment with a key he should not have had, and he used a knife from her own kitchen. That is the sequence. That is what happened. And every step of it was a choice he made. Now ask yourself the question I asked myself the first time I read the case file. What would you have done if you were in that room? Not if you were Robert. Not if you were Carla. If you were Danielle. If you were the woman in the green dress who found out at her best friend's birthday party that the man she loved had been texting someone else all night. What would you have done? I am not asking that as a judgment. I am asking that because it is the question that makes this case matter beyond the case number and the verdict and the sentence. Danielle Reese did not deserve to die. There is no version of this story where she deserved what happened to her. But I have been in this work long enough to know that the world does not care about what people deserve. The world just delivers the outcome and leaves you to make sense of it. So make sense of it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is new to you, if you found your way here and you want to hear more cases the way I tell them, subscribe. There's always more. Case number 19-0847. Danielle Reese, 28 years old. I remember her.